Okay, so we've been waiting for a little bit for this stuff to dry. Like I said, it's going to take probably, 15, 20, maybe even 45 minutes in some cases. And that kind of depends on the weather, how the weather's been. If it's really damp out, it's been raining. So I'm back, and the paint and everything's dry. And remember, I told you how to tell if it's dry. First of all, it won't be shiny, and second of all, if you put your hand on it, it shouldn't feel cold. If your paper feels cold, that means your paint is still wet. So you don't want to, you want to make sure it's completely dry, and the best way to do that is to wait. So like I said, at least I'm going to say, to be safe, probably a half hour to 45 minutes in between, which is why you want to definitely be working on two things at once, right? Two projects at once, so that you can have time to let stuff dry. So I want you to hydrate. If you haven't already done so, I'm going to hydrate some yellow, both your greens, your brown, and your black. So make sure you have some of your paints hydrated. I've already got mine hydrated here, ready to go. And I want you, and I have some extra stuff with me today on our little tray today here. I have a natural sponge. As you can see, it is a natural sponge, right? Small sponge. I have an old crappy toothbrush, right? Don't go out and buy a new one. Just get an old one and boil it or something so that you know that it's clean enough. These are great to use for texturing. And I also have a couple little packets of salt. Okay, just like you'd get from a restaurant. I keep these in my paint box because salt can give you another really cool texturing effect. So what our goal here is I'm to show you several techniques for layering, for doing washes, for masking, for texturing. And so, when next time you go to a restaurant, grab a couple salt packets so that you have them with you for doing this kind of stuff. So this will be another time when we're going to do a few things, and we're going to have to let it dry again. So we'll start out with the flat brush, and we're going to do one more pass on this orange. So I asked you to hydrate your orange, so I have some orange. I've got some oranges. So I'm going to load my brush with orange. Whoops, and it looks like I just got a little contamination of orange into my yellow. So I'm going to take the corner of this Kleenex and just absorb that out, just so I don't have, there we go, that contamination going on, okay? Whoops, so I'm just dripping orange paint, aren't I? This is why it's good to have a rag. Okay. So I want you to load your brush, and you see my brush is loaded. It's so loaded that I managed to drip down the edge of it. So I'm going to take my rag here and wipe it up so I don't have it all over my fingers as well. Okay. There we go. So get your brush loaded. And I'm going to want you to do one more swipe. So I'm going to have you start in the opposite direction. So this time you went this way. This time I want you to go this way. So you're going to start in the middle and put a pretty solid piece down, push your brush down, and then you're going to swipe around like that. Okay, so it just is going to give you an idea of how layering looks on the same color, and with this resist that I've got here in the rubber cement, right? So it has some rubber cement I put on. So now we're going to leave that to dry. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to do some texturing. And the first texturing technique I want to show you is dry brush. So with a dry brush, you literally have a dry brush. So I'm using my round brush, and I'm going to kind of flatten the bristles out. I've already hydrated some black paint. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag the brush along here just with the tips, which I'm going to get a little black paint onto. So you can see I've kind of fanned my brush out so that it's flat, and maybe you can kind of see it if I hold it up like this. You can see I've fanned it out so that it's fairly flat, and I'm going to dip it just a little bit in this black paint that I've already pre-hydrated. All right, and I'm going to blot it slightly on my rag here so it's not too heavy when it goes on. And I'm going to use this to help show a texture for bark. So I'm going to very lightly, okay, drag these flat bristles, and I just kind of watch what I'm doing here, across or up and down the bark that we already painted. So this will give it some texture as if it's real bark. You'll see as we kind of go down here. Whoops, got a little bit over the edge there. So I just very lightly dragged the bristles along the place I already painted, right, to just give it this kind of barky texture. So it gives like real kind of thin lines. So this is over on top of the brown you already painted. Let me rinse my brush now. Okay, I'm going to lift a little bit of my quote accident end quote. So I'm just going to kind of get a little bit of this off so that I don't have to see it. And this is a good time to have a nice absorbent rag because you can kind of blot it up. I'm just going to lift this off because I don't really want that there. Just like we did with the orange paint on the other side. We didn't get it off completely, but we did get some of it so that we don't have to have that look, okay? All right, so I've got that repaired, if you want to say that. Now the next thing we're going to do, here we go. So the next thing we're going to do is, and you have to be careful using this to kind of blotting and stuff because you can actually mess up the rest of your things if you're not too careful with it. So next we're going to do another texturing technique. So I'm going to rinse my brush. And this is using a sponge. So I asked you to hydrate some, both your greens and a yellow. So you're going to use a sponge and you're going to make leaves with it. So you're going to take a little bit of this dark green here and get it on your sponge and try to get it on a couple different areas of your sponge so you can have some different textures, okay? And you don't want it too wet because you're going to lightly tap it here. Whoops, that's too wet, right? Let's see if we can kind of, there we go. That's the effect we want. So you can see I'm lightly tapping and it's getting this kind of cool look to it. I've gone over my kind of blotches there so I can get some more, right? Okay, so you see I'm making leaves for the tree. This is a great texturing effect also to use like for bricks or stone. And now I'm going to take a different part of the sponge and I'll get this different shade of green. And this is how you make stuff look natural, right? As you don't, it's not, things aren't just all one color. Okay, let's see. Now I'm going to put this other shade of green in on top of this darker green that I already have here. And remember, you don't want to cover it too much because it can start looking muddy, right? So you want to leave a lot of white in between here so it looks like the tree, looks like a natural tree. All right, so I'm just kind of leaving some, just dabbing it in. And then finally I'm going to take a little bit of yellow. I'm going to find another area on the sponge that I haven't really used yet. And we'll get a little bit of yellow on it. There we go. All right. You can see I have some yellow on the sponge now. You can see I had the dark green, the light green, and now I've got a little bit of yellow on this tip here. And so now I'm going to just take a little bit of this yellow and dab it around too. And like I said, this is how it's going to make it look a little more natural, as if it's a real tree. Maybe it's a tree with some flowers. You could do another color besides yellow. I use yellow because if it mixes with the green, it looks more natural. Right. So now we've made some textured bark using a dry brush, and we've done some leaves using a natural sponge. So remember, when you're done with your sponge, you're going to need to rinse it out. So take it into the water and into the sink, and make sure you rinse off all the paint. And it may stain your sponge a little bit, but you still want to rinse it so that you have a clean sponge for next time. Otherwise, it's going to hold that color. So now I want you to, we're going to do the prep for our next ones here. So that I asked you to mix up some, hydrate some brown. So now you're going to make some rocks. Okay, so get some brown. This brown here that I'm putting on my brush right now is the brown that I mixed by using green and red together, right? This isn't the brown from your pan, but you can certainly use the brown from your pan. It's just fine. So you're gonna, with the tip of your brush, you're gonna kind of make some rock shapes, like if you saw some boulders on the beach maybe, how might that look? So they'd be kind of flat on the bottom, right? And kind of rounded on top. Right. Make a couple more. Right, and let's see. We can probably do one here. So you're going to make like 3 or 4 little boulders, okay? And you can see I'm just using the tip of my brush, not putting a lot of pressure on, just trying to make an interesting shape. A boulder here. And I think I'll probably do like one more little boulder. We'll make a smaller one right here. So I just use the tip of my brush there. I'm going to try to make them look a little more natural, so I'm going to do a little bit of lifting on the top here, with a little bit of water. Notice that I'm kind of just adding a little water to this, tiny bit, right? Because I want it to look like kind of more like natural rock. So, you know, in nature, things aren't just all one color, one hue. There's some, you know, variation for light and dark, where light's hitting stuff, right? So I'm just going to go back here and just do a little bit of lifting off of this darker color on the top here, so it looks like maybe there's light hitting the top of the boulders. Right, so I'm just taking a little bit of water. You can see I'm wiping it on my rag as I'm done. Right, so I'm just kind of lifting off a little bit. I don't want to overdo it because I still want to have that brown, right? I'm just going to get a little bit of variation on this hue here. So we're making it a little bit lighter on the top, just like it might be in Mother Nature, right? Just, you don't want to overwork it. You can see I'm just using the tip of my brush, and I'm, you know, not doing a lot of pressure. See, I'm just kind of lifting off a little bit of the darkness, that's all. Okay. So now we're going to have to leave that to dry. And while we're waiting for that to dry, we're going to do a couple more things here. And one is we're going to finish the clouds. So to finish the clouds, and up till now I've been using this little mixing thing here. But I really recommend that you have some kind of a palette. I have a little plastic one here. Like I said, you can use a plate. Plate works great with something like this. So we're going to take just a little bit of this black, and I'm talking a little tiny bit. I'm just going to put it a little tiny bit in the middle of my palette here, right? And I'm going to water it down a lot because I don't really want it dark, right? I want it more like a kind of a grayish hue. So I'm going to use a lot of extra water on it. Now here's where you're going to need your Kleenex again. Okay, so you're going to have your little Kleenex ready to go. And remember, I want you to keep some Kleenex in your painting kit. Okay, so now I have a little bit of this kind of dark gray that I've put a lot of extra water in, right? Because I don't really want it. I don't want it black. I want just a little, just that hint of darkness. And you know, if you look up in the sky and you look at clouds, they're usually kind of dark underneath, right? And you have some little variation. So I'm going to take this little bit of kind of light gray and I'm going to put it along the bottom of the cloud. And I might even put a couple little, pieces along here. Now, this doesn't look natural, right? So I'm going to take some water and I'm going to kind of, dilute it. And then I'm going to dab it again. I'm just dabbing it. Right, so I'm just having a slight bit of darkness at the bottom of the cloud. So let's do it on the other clouds. So here we go. We're going to make it look like a real cloud. Right, and I'm going to take a little bit of water. Kind of soften it there so it doesn't look unnatural. And then once again, I'm going to take my Kleenex, find a clean spot there, and just kind of dab it up, just blot it up just a little bit. So it's still there, but it's very subtle, right? Now, so I'm not using black here. So I'm doing the same on this one. See, I'm just kind of dabbing it. There's already a little bit of color variation here, so we're trying to make it look a little more natural. Right. And I'll take the Kleenex and kind of blot that up again. You're not wiping it, you're just kind of dabbing a little bit because you want to keep a lot of that darker color, right? But you don't want it, you want it to look natural. So you just have a little bit of a hint of it being darker underneath here. And that's what's going to make it look like a natural cloud. We'll do a little bit more here, make it look like the bottom of a natural cloud here. If you had stormy clouds, you might do them even a little bit darker, right? If there was like a storm brewing in the sky. I could have a little bit darker piece here on the end, even make it look like it's a little darker than it really was. And when you're done, you're going to have this kind of a stain on the bottom that looks more like a natural cloud would look. Right, so it's very subtle. You're not just making a line and then not doing anything with it. You're making art. Is what you're doing. You're making some cool looking clouds. It'll look like a natural cloud when you're done. Right. Okay. So we'll leave that to dry, and we're going to leave these to dry. But I want to do one more thing while we're here. So remember we worked on this earlier. And by now it should be completely dry. You shouldn't feel any dampness or anything there. So now we're going to go back and we're going to kind of do the background here, but we're going to make it real subtle, just like we talked about, right? So I want to have a little bit of blue in the sky. So I'm going to hydrate just a tiny bit of blue, a little bit of blue-green I kind of mixed up here earlier. Get a little bit. And this is really light. I'm going to use a lot of water with it. But this is why we're going to kind of do a wash, but we're doing it over what we've already done. So we have to be really careful that we don't mess up the color. So I'm just going to kind of slightly go like this. Right? I don't want to really lift the color that we already have here. Right? So I'm just kind of dabbing in a little bit. And it's okay to leave a little bit of white too. And then down here, we're going to do some green. So I'm going to take a little bit of green that I already had mixed. Oh, this one, here we go. Maybe a little bit different color than, or shade than what we have for the, I'm going to put a little bit in here so it's a little dark and interesting, a little interesting looking. There you go. So it's definitely a different color. And then do the same thing down here. We're going to just kind of give it a little bit of extra green. Right. So it just fills it in a little bit. And remember, less is more with watercolor. You don't want to overdo this. We do the same over here. I want to put a little bit of green over here, but I'm not going to use my flat brush. I'm going to use my round brush for this one and put my flat brush down and get my round brush out. And I'll take a little bit of this green that I just kind of mixed here with the black that I had. So it's just a little bit of a different shade. And I'm going to put a little bit of kind of the hint of some green on the ground here. Notice that it's real subtle. Like I'm not just making it all one color. I'm leaving some white and I'm leaving some space. Right? So I'm just kind of, and this will help me fix up my little mistake there where I went over the edge. So here we go. So we have a little bit of background there as well. So it's kind of filling in. Now we have to let everything dry. So rinse your brush. And once again, you're going to step away from it, give it about a half hour or maybe even 45 minutes to dry up so we can move on to the next step. And next we're going to be using some masking, our toothbrush, right, and some salt. So make sure you have a little bit of salt. You could just get some from your shaker, you know, a few pinches. You don't need a whole lot. I have 2 packets here and an old crappy toothbrush. So that's what we're going to start on next. And in the meantime, make sure you wash your sponge out and cover your water, because when you leave your water, you don't want it to spill over on your stuff. The worst thing is to have your dog or cat jump up on your project and spill it all over your paper that you've been working on so hard. So you're going to be turning this in, and so I want you to follow along with me as we're doing it.